behave eventually, don't you? Thank you very much, everybody, for being here and for coming along. And I hope we'll have lots more chats, time to catch up. It's so nice to have face-to-face events, isn't it? When circumstances allow. After our so many years of having to be online. There's lots of places for it, but this is really, really good to do something face to face. So thank you, especially to those of you that have travelled a long way. My name's Jill Frigerio. I'm the outgoing chair of NICEC. So I'm halfway through my last day. And my day job's at the University of Warwick, so I was able to choose this venue. That's only 25 minutes away on the train. So next time, well, it depends who's leading NICEC in the future, where we're going to. Anyway, we wanted to have a network event face to face, a particular one to mark 50 years of NICEC. NICEC was founded in 1975 by a group of founding fellows, which includes Tony Watts, who's with us today. And we'll be having a drinks reception after the main event, where we're going to mark that occasion. So NICEC started out as a kind of consultancy organisation, and over time it's transitioned to a learning society model, where we have a group of fellows and members, and we put on events. We have a journal. We collaborate with the Career Development Institute on practitioner-focused events, and we do things like this. And we were joking we had our AGM this morning, and we were talking about our kind of brand and USP and our priorities, and we decided that we needed the studio, who've got all these motivational names for rooms. We need to have one of them renamed Disagree, because we're such a broad fellowship that we're up for serious thinking about career development, but we come from lots of different perspectives. And I just want to say a bit about that before I hand over to Tristram, who's going to introduce the main focus of our afternoon, which is about the role of career development work in terms of skills and growth. So this is our agenda for today. Tristram, I'll hand over to Tristram in a moment. And we have our 5 speakers. You may notice that only 4 of them are in the room. Thank you, John, Stephen, Claudia and Sandra, for being here. Chris, unfortunately, wasn't able to be here, but he has recorded his presentation. So we're going to be able to watch it online. And then we will move into discussion and consideration of the different perspectives that we've heard. And we're hoping that we're bringing together a breadth of perspectives from some things that are a bit more kind of research based, some very much policy focused, thinking about policy and how it's implemented in different ways, and also thinking about practice and covering a breadth of perspectives. Just to say something about NICEC, this is one of my favourite images at the moment, and I'm often heard working a yarn-based metaphor. My current favourite metaphor is about weaving, and I'm thinking very much about NICEC and the different strands, the warp of a fabric being the different strands of career development work, from work in schools, work with young people, work in colleges and universities and in other educational settings, through to work with adults through statutory provision, embedded with different forms, different environments like health and welfare, private provision, and careers work that's delivered within employers, within employing organisations. So there's a whole breadth of different settings for career development work. I mean, career development work's happening over the dinner table, I'm sure, when some of us are talking to our friends and families. But it's also, so we've got that angle, and we've also got that idea of research, scholarship, policy and practice coming together. So we're trying not just to talk about the doing, to reflect on why we do it like that, what informs that, but equally we're not, hopefully, we're just talking about ideas. We're talking about the actual practice of career development work and the impact it can have on people's lives on the ground. So that's NICEC and who we are and how we operate. So I think there might be some of you for whom this is your first NICEC event, and thank you very much for being here. And now we'll dig into our focus on career development work and its particular value in relation to skills and growth. And I'll hand over to fellow NICEC fellow Tristram Hooley.
Thank you.
There you are.
Yeah.
You need that?
I don't think I do. All right, well, yes, welcome everybody. So I think as Jill has described, we have lots of discussions in NICEC, sometimes frustratingly inward-looking discussions, arguing. I've spent, I think, many hours arguing what do we really mean by career in a group which has the term career in its title, is always endlessly fun. But you know, I think the point of NICEC is that we look at issues and we try and look at them in a kind of deep way, and not necessarily with the sense of coming to kind of an easy answer. And I think what we're going to do today is look at policy, essentially. We're looking at where does career development, this activity that we're all interested in, where does it fit into these big systems of employment, of skills, of you know, local government, of national government, and so on. And so we've got a fantastic panel who are going to introduce all of this to you. So we've got John Hall from the West Midlands Combined Authority. Wave, we'll get you up in a second. Stephen Isherwood from the Institute for Student Employers. Claudia Jaksch from Policy Connect, and Sandra Oribine from SDS, Skills Development Scotland. And I think that's one of the important things that we want to try and remember, is that in the UK, we've got lots of different policy contexts. So when we're talking about policy, we're not just talking about what happens in Westminster, but also in Scotland, in Wales, but also in Manchester, in the West Midlands, and so on. And so this is, I think, one of the themes that's going to emerge today. And then out of the room, we've also got Chris Percy, who works with many organisations, but has been very involved in doing lots of consultancy with kind of policy and local organisations, and particularly is interested in the issue of the sort of return on investment of career development work. So the format that we're gonna adopt for this is, I asked everyone to speak very briefly. I said 7 minutes, then slipped up and said 10 minutes, because that's what I think they'll really talk for, but no longer than that. And then I'll try and just draw out a few themes from what people have said, and then we'll throw it over to you. We'll give you a little bit of time to talk amongst yourself and kind of come up with some points, and then we'll come back to the panel and have some discussion with the panel about some of what they've said. So that's the format for today. So I think without further ado, I would like to ask John to come up and start us off.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the West Midlands, welcome to Birmingham. I wanted to utilise my 7 minutes today really to talk about the local challenge, the challenge we face in relation to how we realise our ambitions for the West Midlands. We've recently published the West Midlands Growth Plan. We're an ambitious region. We really want our residents to feel the ambition, to connect with the ambition, to be part of the journey. But there's a real risk around disconnect. There's a real risk around those individuals not feeling like they're part of the exciting opportunities that are going to be part of this. Some of the key ambitions that we set out around the West Midlands Growth Plan, particularly around our peoples and skills, and particularly around our places, around how we develop an integrated employment and skills system. We talk about this a lot, but how do we make sure skills and employment support and careers all talk to each other? How do we make sure that all the funding that gets drawn down is connected in a way that really benefits our residents? Equally, it's around it's around providing that guarantee for young people. It's around making sure that every young person has the opportunity to engage with employment support, to engage with skills. And it's also outlining our ambitions that sit within our Get West Midlands working plan as well. And the challenge that we've got is around actually, from the discussions with the government, how do we get to 80% employment rate across our region? And this is where the challenge begins to unfold. So my next slide really starts talking around actually the challenge for our residents in engaging within our services. So as part of getting to an 80% conversion rate for people within work, what that means in tangible figures is that we're going to have to support an extra 196,000 individuals to get into work. Where are we going to get those individuals from? Well, this slide really starts to look at the challenge, because normally when we have the conversations around this, we might be talking around, well, it's unemployed people, it's individuals that are on the unemployment register. But actually, that's only about 6%. That doesn't take us the distance that we need to move. Actually, if you start looking at these figures, and apologies around the as I say, the detail that sits within this, but we've got 201,000 inactive long-term people with long-term health conditions, 177,000 individuals who are inactive disabled, and 364,000 individuals who are who are inactive but don't have a long-term health condition. So the challenge for us is how do we engage in a different way with those individuals to bring them on the journey, because it isn't necessarily as straightforward as it being a connection with Job Centre Plus. This is about communities, this is about engagement at an earlier point, and how we begin to, I suppose, ignite the ambition within our residents to be able to do this. And then my final slide with a transition, is around this slide. Now, I'm not suggesting this is a slide of good practice. In fact, it's not. But this is a slide which kind of looks at all of the different interventions that potentially exist within the West Midlands. It's not even all of the interventions. This is kind of a snapshot of some of those that are more perhaps pronounced in relation to how we talk about them. Now, one of our challenges is that this is really hard for practitioners to look through. So I spent 25 years in employment and skills, working as a careers advisor, working for a job centre, working in the private sector. Really difficult for practitioners to go through. But actually, one of our the challenges, how do we expect a resident to be able to navigate this? And ultimately, the key thing around this is taking the resident through these different stages, which aren't linear as we go through, but having the engagement to find the best intervention that works for them at the right time. And that's an absolute challenge. And that's why it's hugely important in terms of the work that we do around careers, and around careers being kind of the test bed which glues the entire system together. Without strong careers advice, without guidance, individuals will only be attracted to the bits that they know about, not necessarily the right bits. And this is why I suppose as part of our growth plan and part of our strategy, that the next stage or the next phase for us is the importance of an all-age career strategy, which helps us to unlock the opportunity within the system, improve access and progression. So for me, that is a fundamental next step for the West Midlands Combined Authority to help our residents engage with those opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to hand straight over to Stephen to give us some of the employer perspectives.
Cool. Thank you, Tristram. Institute of Student Employers, just in case one or two of you don't remember, might know them as the AGR, Association of Graduate Recruiters. So we changed the name. I don't want to give you history of the IEC, because the whole world that employers operate in terms of early careers has changed. So you no longer get what I used to be, which was kind of a head of graduate recruitment. So what I want to do in my 7 minutes is just kind of talk you through some of those pressures that I think are reshaping that kind of early careers sector, and also how we think it's going to reshape over the years to come, and the relevance that has for more. I'm going to stay very much sort of big level. If you want to go onto the IC website, you can see we did a report on this whole stuff. There's a whole bunch of other data resources there that we can follow up on afterwards. So, you may already, I mean, this is relatively common knowledge, but I think it's worth actually just dwelling on for a moment, and that's the changing demographics of the UK. We used to talk about population pyramids. It's no longer a pyramid, as you can see, a bit more like a Canary Wharf tower. And we often talk about an aging population. That is, people are getting older, living longer, pension age going up, retirement age going up, so therefore people are going to want to work longer or have to work longer. What we don't talk about very often is the declining birth rate. There are fewer people aged 15 to 19 now in the UK than there are aged 55 to 59. And if you just pause and think for a moment what that means for a labour market, that means actually that market has very much changed shape. If we were sat here in Germany and I put the German chart up, it's even narrower at the bottom. So when I'm talking to employers, I'm trying to get them to think about some of these longer term structural issues in the economy and how it's going to affect actually their future talent plans. Because if you think about an employer and the talent pool in which they hire in, an organisation that may historically have relied on actually quite a lot of people coming in at a young age. Some sectors rely on that more than others. Hospitality, leisure, for example. You know, my background is professional services, accountancy firms. You know, they still do to a certain extent have a kind of pyramid structure when it comes to age in the organisation. But that demographic shift is going to have to change the way that employers think about the populations they may target. The second key force that, again, I don't think we talk to enough about properly and really thinking it through. We get wrapped up into culture wars around too many people going to university, etc., etc. I think very often we're asking the wrong questions or making the wrong statements. And this is around skills. Now, we could probably have as long a debate around the meaning of the word skills as you do about careers, so let's not go there. But basically, this is talking about the level of, I guess, skill involved in actually jobs within the economy. And basically, what this graph shows, I won't go into too much detail, but 2015, 2025 now, 2035 projections for the future. The jobs at this end are in the higher skilled category. Jobs at the bottom end are in the lower skilled, more manual type work. And actually what you'll see when you look at this, that actually in the more lower skilled type roles, there's not actually going to be a significant decline. That's relatively flat, but the demand is going to stay pretty constant. There'll be some shifting around. You know, it's predicted that AI will take jobs out of, let's say, business administration and shift it into other sectors, maybe the care sector. So there's an element of shifting around there, which goes back to the point we had around people knowing what's available and where the jobs are. But if you look at this end, you know, more complex type work, that's where the increase is. If I put a slide up of actual, not vacancies, but jobs in the economy, and actually the number of skilled jobs in the economy, the last 20 years, you would just see a constant increase. You can't even see a blip for the financial crash in 2008 or COVID 2020, just that constant. And actually, when you talk to employers, this does reflect most of their worlds. If I go back to, you know, my previous life, as I said, professional services, I stay in touch with those organisations. I know what they're doing, the PwCs, the EYs of the world. So yes, job vacancies will go up and down in line with the economy. But despite offshoring, despite technology change, despite numerous reorganisations, actually the number of people they're hiring, particularly at that kind of graduate school year end of the market, still keeps going up. They're recruiting double what they were, let's say, 15 years ago. So two big forces that we think employers really need to think about when it comes to the labour market, and that is demographic change, actually the skills need of roles getting more and more complex. I think at the moment, to a certain extent, employers are protected from that because we are in a low growth environment. I'm sure you read all the headlines around what's happening in the jobs market. We obviously collect a lot of data on employers. Our data says it's not as bad as the headlines suggest, Kelso breeze, but it is a tough market out there for students. But I think that more ad hoc market, the jobs that aren't necessarily structured training processes, there's real problems there at the moment. So in a sense, employers don't quite have to think about this at the moment because if they are recruiting, there are talent pools they can tap into. But assuming we get back to growth at some point, cast your minds back to 2022. If you were a HR department, a recruiter in that world, you could not find people for that level of money. We were hiring somebody, a small business in the event space. I think the third offer was when we finally got somebody, because they kept getting effectively gazumped. And this is people who'd been through an interview. So if you think about how tight that labour market is, actually the minute we get back to growth and employer demand goes up, that's where actually employers have to really start scratching their heads. So at the moment, it's difficult to get them to think about it because of the current climate. There's a whole bunch of literature out there about skills-based organisation. And if you're interested in this, we've got links on our website. As I said, come and talk to me about it. But actually, the organisations that are thinking further ahead are thinking about how do they reskill existing employees? How do they keep people for longer? Because again, you go back to the demographic model. If you're a business that typically is hired and fired, as the economy shifts, actually you're not going to be able to do that in the future because that talent pool isn't there. And organisations that do better at retaining people, reskilling, upskilling, they're going to be attracting that talent. So those kind of competitive forces are going to come into play. And just as a final point, considering yourselves as an audience, if I go back to around 2000, I was at PwC at the time. PwC used to have an internal careers team. Actually, it's a legacy of Pricewaterhouse at the merger. 2 or 3 people you could go to and talk about your career, actually probably trained career specialists. They were got rid of, career HR reorganisations. Those organisations are now starting to put that capability back into their development programs, their HR structures, because again, the more forward thinking see that need. So I do think that those 2 forces are going to make actually this whole careers guidance from an employer's point of view much more important in the future. No idea if that was 7 minutes or not, but we'll go.
Thank you for that. Okay, and then now I'll hand over to Claudia. I think we've heard now about local perspectives, about employer perspectives. What we're hoping for from you is some thoughts about where we're going nationally, and also what kind of policy frameworks are around for this.
Not sure I can fully fulfill that brief, but I'll try to sort of highlight on the basis of our work a few examples, hopefully connecting to some of what John on a regional basis has said and how Stephen has described the employer side of things. Just briefly, I'm the Chief Exec of Policy Connect. We're a cross-party think tank. The way we work is through supporting all party parliamentary groups and research commissions to influence policy making in a variety of different policy areas, but in particular also in the skills, careers and employment space. So we support the APPG for skills, careers and employment. We work closely with the Career Development Policy Group on the career side of things here. So it's a really important pillar for Policy Connect. Through those groups, we currently work on a research inquiry called Earning or Learning, a new agenda for youth need reduction. So we really want to develop an ambitious policy agenda that aims for the UK to have the lowest percentage of young people not in employment, education or training. Currently, we have about just under 1 million young people not in education, employment or training. That's 1 in 8. And we've just heard from Stephen, a dwindling talent pool that's no longer, that we can't really rely on. So for future growth, it'll be really important to develop young people and help them into satisfying careers and sustainable careers. I'll feed in a bit what we heard from young people throughout the inquiry process. So we've held a number of focus groups with people in that age category, so that's 16 to 24, how they experience the careers landscape, how they experience transitions from schools to colleges, from colleges into employment. And we very often hear that the information that young people receive about careers advice is very uneven. It is still quite higher education centric. And apprenticeships, level 2 and 3 technical routes are quite poorly understood in the information that they receive, or they're not really, or only inconsistently available. So for a young person outside of the university track, the pathways are really invisible often. Secondly, there's a number of very real barriers that young people face. That's practical barriers, transport costs, for example, limited local offer that they have in their environment, gaps in digital access, digital poverty is a real thing. And then for many, the kind of job center setting feels stigmatizing rather than supportive at the moment. And then thirdly, there's a whole lot of extra pressures mounting around young people as well. Mental health needs, special educational needs very often are not met adequately. Personal social health and economic lessons don't quite deliver the practical what's next steps that a 16-year-old might really need. So in that context, what does effective career development look like? And I think that applies to the national level. So hopefully that'll draw out some of like the wider policy points that we're hoping to discuss. So at transition points, the ones that I just mentioned, a qualified career development professional can make all the difference. They act as neutral brokers. They offer one-to-one guidance across all routes. They connect young people with employers, and they coordinate wraparound support with local services so that ideally no one falls through the cracks. It's not just about doing the right thing for young people, although that's very much at the heart of this, but there is a real economic benefit of all of this. We know high quality guidance pays dividends for the economy. It's linked to lower youth unemployment. It's linked to lower youth inactivity. It results in better matching to shortage roles, higher retention rates, and greater social mobility. So it turns skills investments into real results. We have emerging evidence from our research that points to practical steps that we can take. We need to make vocational and employment information more visible and more accessible. And that means real entry points at levels 2 and 3 and clear pathways into local employers. But we also need to embed young people's voices in all of this. What we heard from speaking with young people, those with the lived experience of operating in this environment, they really need to have a say in the design and the delivery of these services so that they reflect their experiences rather than just the policy theory that we all talk about. We also heard that there's a need for local hubs, ideally hybrid, so that there's information online and physical information that young people can access all in one place. And we have to strengthen in-school and college guidance so that every learner has a meaningful encounter with an employer and receives clear signposting for their next steps. I was also asked to talk a bit about like how can we achieve this, how at Policy Connect we work to make these things happen so that it's not just great insights into the current situation, but like how can we transform that into national policy and inform that. So we support all party parliamentary groups. That's one route of influencing parliamentary discussion and engaging with government officials and policymakers and educate them on the issues. We bring together employers, education providers, and young people themselves to shape those recommendations that we make. And our aim is to make career development and career advice and guidance a central pillar of the UK skills agenda, so that investment in training and in qualifications matched with the guidance needed to really make them a success. In October, we're meeting with Skills England, with Phil Smith, for example, to have part of that conversation with him. And hopefully Skills England we can understand how that body might straddle young people, career advice and guidance, adult career advice and guidance, and bring that together. So I think I'll leave it at that. And,
Thank you.
Okay,
so thank you to Claudia for that, because I think we've sort of started with I suppose, the problem, the big shifts that are happening? What's the nature of the the policy aims and of the changing environment? Claudia's now started to move us into the question of whether career development activities, career guidance can be part of the solution to that. And I suspect Sandra will take us a little bit further down that line. So I hand over to you.
Right, thank you. I'm conscious of the noise outside, so if you can't hear me, let me know. I'm also conscious of the Scottish accent. That's not good for things. So I'm from Skills Development Scotland, and we are the National Skills Agency for Scotland. And within that National Skills Agency is the Career Service. So very much our role is looking at skills and growth and the role of career development within that. And Jill's weaving, I do think that career development is very much the policy connector piece, and I'll maybe give an example of that. If I forget, because I am a menopausal woman, but I want to mention a film at the end of this, and a quote and a song from the film that reminds me about the social mobility, the core role of career development, and what we're all about when it comes to the individual. It's just a clicker somewhere. So just the middle button.
Yeah.
So Skills Development Scotland, this is our skills planning model for Scotland, and the individual part of it is where the career service part is, and where we place career development very much central in our shared mission of expanding and growing an inclusive workforce in Scotland. And I keep saying the word inclusive. We want to make Scotland the best small country in the world for people to live and work and develop. So our skills planning model is basically aimed to improve the responsiveness of education, training and career services that ensures that people can all participate and that employers get what they need for us to be that inclusive economy. The skills model is all about a robust evidence base, so that we can anticipate and articulate the current and the future needs, because we know that the world is moving incredibly fast, is becoming more complex, and so are the individuals that we work with, and that's why we train to the highest standards and we continue our CPD, because we deal with the most complex beings in the world, individuals. The skills planning model is about intensive partnership, working as well to get it right. And as I said, putting career information, advice and guidance at the heart of that. And it's to ensure that we as career practitioners don't deliver in a vacuum, that we maintain our impartiality, but that we're not indifferent to the world and to the people that we work with. And so that's really key to us. I'm going to give an example just on the skills agenda in Scotland just now, the challenge and the potential opportunity that we're putting career development slap bang in the middle. So we have a huge challenge in our Highlands and Islands in Scotland. We have a huge opportunity of an estimated over 100 billion investment in the region. We did have a visitor recently to a golf course in Scotland. He was too keen on the windmills, but we are. So we have a huge natural resource in Scotland, and other countries do as well. And it's basically, there's a lot of investment coming to the Highlands and Islands, which is fantastic, but it's given us a huge challenge in that we have an ageing population in the Highlands and Islands, a small population in the Highlands and Islands, and we need to attract and keep the talent in the Highlands and Islands and grow it as well. So that's the key challenge for us, and these are all the areas where we will have opportunities in Scotland. The Skills Development Scotland, we've worked with Highlands and Islands Enterprise, we've worked with the University of Highlands and Islands and Inverness and Cromarty for Freeport, basically to consult and research and confirm what is the workforce gap that exists in the Highlands and Islands just now. We also, anything we do in Scotland, we have an Islands Impact Assessment on it, to basically ensure that we are supporting and maintaining our islands community. And from this, the challenges that are highlighted are securing and retaining talent, a lot of what was said by my colleagues. Sector attractiveness, so how do people know about what's out there for them and what they would have the opportunity to come into. So again, the points it made, if you don't know what's there, like, how do you choose it? Equality of access and provision, and again, my colleague who spoke first about how do we ensure that we have an inclusive nature to workforce growth? How do we ensure that we get all the talent that's in Scotland into the opportunities there? And I see all the talent, it's also about attracting talent to Scotland as well. And really understanding what are the opportunities that are going to be in Scotland. And again, that's key for career practitioners, that they're out there giving guidance, their awareness and understanding what are the sectors, what's the growth, what's the types of occupations they're going to be. So that's a big challenge for us. The opportunities from the consultation and evidence gathered allows 5 themes to come up, and those 5 themes have career development slap bang in the heart of all of them. So ensuring that our young people, we start early now, because we think this investment in Scotland will be a 10 to 15 years. It's a generational huge opportunity. How do our schools, our young people understand what are the opportunities so that they would want to stay in the Highlands and Islands and work and grow their family? How do we ensure that we improve access to fair work? And again, that's a very big agenda, policy agenda of Scottish Government, that it's high quality and good work. And that's where the quote will come in a minute. Apprenticeship expansion, Skills Development Scotland, we coordinate the apprenticeship programme at this point in time for Scottish Government, from foundation apprenticeships in schools to modern apprenticeship to graduate level apprenticeships. How do we expand that? We also have apprenticeships for careers advisors as well, trainee careers advisors, and we struggle to recruit careers advisors, particularly in the Highlands and Islands. So again, our own sector as well has an issue to help us deliver on this agenda as well. Upskilling and reskilling, again, short, sharp training that we can move people quickly into where the opportunities may be, and it won't cost them to do that. And talent attraction and retention. This is where I think that career development starts to do policy connection as well. And I'll give you examples of attraction and retention. Scottish Government has an ambition that for our armed forces community, that Scotland is a destination of choice when you're transitioning and leaving your military service. We have huge opportunities, but a lot of armed forces bases in Scotland. I'm the armed forces lead for Skills Development Scotland, and one of the things we've been doing is understanding that customer group, understanding their language, understanding their skills, and how do they translate those skills as they come into civilian life, so that they see the opportunities coming out of civilian life. We capitalise on the military talent and skills, high level talent and skills that they have. So that's just an area where our careers advisors are really starting to understand, one, a customer group, the customer group's family, what skills they have, the language of skills that they use, and how can they translate that into the language of civilian skills. So that's a key thing for us as well. So all of this, to me, in particular about the career development, during lockdown, I watched a heck of a lot of Netflix films, and one of the films I watched was Pride. I don't know if anybody's seen Pride, fantastic film, if you haven't seen it. But one of the songs in Pride is Bread and Roses, which was a folk song that was taken on board for about workers' rights, and it was actually particularly about women's workers' rights. And it says that hearts starve as well as bodies. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give them bread, but also give them roses. Bread to me is the job. Roses is the career, the high quality, and that's what we're about making sure that people have fair, high quality careers, and that's why we put career development in all of these, so that people get every opportunity they can, and it is inclusive for them.
Thank you. Well, we're going to hear from
to Chris now.
Chris Percy now. So whenever I meet anyone who I work with, they always say, "Oh, have you met Chris? He's so clever and so amazing." It's not like you. He's somebody I was feeling a little bit put out by it, but he is genuinely quite brilliant. So we want to, even though he wasn't able to be here, we asked him to do a short film just to talk about some of the issues that we asked him to talk about. So.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Percy and I work mainly on the impact data science and AI side of career provision. there's been a hint of something unusual in lots of the data I look at. Even looking back at work I did a decade ago, there's something hiding in there that I maybe didn't appreciate at the time. And that's what Jill has kindly asked me to share with you today. Thanks, Jill, for inviting me. Now, what do I mean by something unusual? Well, let's start with what isn't unusual. The general idea in careers provision or any activity is that you do more of it, up to a point, you get more benefits. The natural question from policymakers is typically around how much is enough? Is 5 days of work experience enough, or do we need 10? One guidance interview or 2? Now, I don't think policymakers are implying that all benefits stop after 5 days or 10 days, but rather that you've got most of the benefits already. So it's reasonable to shift priority elsewhere. Diminishing returns to scale, a standard principle in various walks of life, so it shouldn't be surprising to find it in careers provision. Now, the unusual hint is this. I'm not sure we're seeing diminishing returns to scale, or at least not yet, and not at typical levels of provision. I think we might be seeing something nearer to accelerating returns to scale, or we might need to increase provision beyond current levels before that acceleration of impact really starts to kick in. Now, let me start by saying that the current practice in a whole range of settings does seem to be generating a pretty decent positive return on investment. And this was the finding from a literature review that Tristram and I did a couple of years back. So typically, across over 30 estimates, for every £1 that goes into career guidance related activities, you might get £2 to £4 back. Not every programme comes out positive, and there will be bad programmes that have never had this kind of evaluation, but the general picture should be encouraging more implementation and more experimentation of this kind of work. But when you look deeper into the data, sometimes you see a different pattern. Now, this chart shows typical wages in later life, depending on how many careers talks you had aged 14 to 15. The source is on the slide. I won't go into the statistical details here. What I want to draw out is, well, maybe I'll first say at the time, Elnaz and I analysed the average impact, and it's about 1% higher wages per talk. It's substantial enough to drive policy decisions, not so transformative that it's a daft claim. But look at the chart. It's more accurate to say that there was very little average impact up to maybe 5 or so talks, at least in this data set by this measurement, but then it really starts to take off. The average number that we reported is kind of, if you put a straight line through it rather than look at, what's a slightly kinked curve. So at least for those few people getting so much provision, more than 6, more than 10 talks over the year, there's a dramatic difference compared to those only getting 1 or 2. At age 15 or 16, the picture is more positive, for a few talks, more higher than 0. But again, we see this kind of substantial increase. I've seen this pattern again and again, including in much more recent data. So we've got analyses in Careers Wales looking at group guidance. We've got some work in England looking at how these talks might influence revision hours, and in primary schools. They all show a kind of a similar pattern. It's not always quite so clear, but you can see more on that if you follow the source on the slide. For now, I want to explore what's going on. So these trigger thresholds and these accelerating returns to investment, they're very closely related. Let's think about kind of why it might be the case. So if I tell you about one job, that isn't very useful unless it happens to be the one job for you, or you're about to apply for it or something. But if I tell you about 2 jobs and you're at the early stage of thinking, or you're still exploring these things, you can start to compare and contrast. What aspects of one job might be better than the other? What compromises come in order to get that, whatever is better about the first one? But it's still only one comparison. By the time we get up to 5 jobs, you've actually got 10 sets of one-to-one comparisons. And this is the combinatorial power of comparisons, and it's a direct driver of accelerating returns. And maybe that's particularly relevant when you're trying to gain purchase on such a vast topic, such as what am I going to do with the rest of my life in general, and what are the first credible steps I could take that move me in that direction, given where I'm starting and what's available to me. This is a huge space, vast numbers of jobs out there, 412 occupational codes in the 2020 list for the UK. It's sort of out of date, and there's lots more detail underneath some of that. There's just thousands of things. We all know this in the room. Maybe with such a vast topic, you don't just need a few comparisons before you can start to gain purchase on it. Maybe you need a few dozen. Trigger point is also something about maybe you've got to say the same thing, the same basic message more than once for it to happen to hit the right person at the right time. Maybe they need to hear it from the right person or experience it in the right way as well before it triggers a shift in someone's mindset, particularly a younger person's mindset, where they start to take these kinds of career exploration opportunities more seriously. As soon as they start to take them more seriously, they will start to get more benefit from them. So if they didn't get benefit from the first few while waiting for that trigger moment, they may suddenly start to get it from then onwards. That's where we start to see triggers at individual levels that translate into an accelerating impact when you look at it in aggregate. When you then apply that across a classroom or across a school, you can start to see with lots of individuals having such a trigger in shifting their engagement, a corresponding change in the culture. At a certain point, activities happening weekly perhaps, it might become common just to chat about this, not every week with your friends, but you start to chat about it more. It's coming up more in classes, it's coming up more in activities. Now, what to do about this? I can only say, a few points here. It's really a different session, but there's something about proportionate ambition. So the Overton window for careers guidance, has typically been about kind of incrementing up, getting a little bit more provision into schools, 2 weeks work experience rather than one, this sort of level. Maybe this is just simply disproportionate to the challenge we're facing, this goal of figuring out what to do with the rest of your life, trying to figure out where the job that you might do fits in as part of a broad society, all this kind of hugely atomized roles and how they fit together so you've got a sense of what we collectively achieve, even if your job doesn't always feel that relevant to you on a Monday morning. Maybe the proportionate ambition is an order of magnitude higher than what we're looking at. Now, easier said than done, but we should at least start by recognizing what is required to address the ambition and start to unlock these accelerating returns. And if we start with the idea that there is maybe a systematic map that we want to work towards, maybe it's a few dozen major occupational code categories, a few dozen major industries, we can start to piece together ad hoc opportunities, careers talks, work experiences, insights from a parent, what someone knows from outside of life, what is linked to one part of a curriculum, what a teacher might know from a job they did in the past that they're willing to talk to young people about who might have questions, even if it's not a full career talk. Start to fill in the gaps in that map. And okay, it might take several years before you can even fill in large parts of the map. But if you've got a few dots of experience in different parts of the map, those comparisons, that combinatorial power will start to be unlocked. We've also got an opportunity with AI and technology to start to do a lot more, a lot faster, and a bit more outside perhaps of normal provision. There's a chatbot I'm involved with, it's CC-Chat. You can see it at the bottom of the screen. Please take a look. And that's where I've got to stop. There's so much more we could say. You've got my contact details there. Please reach out, please get in touch. And yeah, I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Give Chris a round of applause. So, I think what I've heard is that there are quite a large range of social, economic, political problems which people have highlighted, some of which I think get a lot of attention. So we've heard about growth. Keir Starmer can't get out of bed in the morning without mentioning growth. But there are also other things which like get talked about only on the fringes. So things like the demographic shifts that Stephen was talking about, or some of the issues around rural development that Sandra was talking about, issues of social mobility, well-being, health, mental health. These things came up as big issues. Now, I think what the panel are all agreed on is that those issues play out through the lives of individuals. They play out through people's careers. And not to say that everything is about career decision making, but how we end up in a situation where we're in a society which has strong growth, or in a society which has high levels of equality or whatever, often plays out through individuals' careers. And I think because of that, there's also a point here that career development activities, career guidance, careers education, whatever we want to call it, has the potential to make quite a big impact on these big political issues, big social economic issues. And in fact, I mean, as Chris has just suggested, it's possible that the return on investment is really, really high here. I mean, if we say, look, we want to rework the way the whole vocational education system works, it's an awful lot more expensive than if we say we want to give people a bit more career guidance than they're currently getting. It's possible that there's a really strong, and I think what we've heard from the panel is quite a lot of consensus. There are problems. A lot of those are about or the way that they're experienced by people relates to their career. There are things that we can actually do about them, and we've got quite a lot of good ideas about how to do them. And we've heard things about qualified career development professionals and work experience and good information and hubs and coordination in terms of how the systems work and so on. So I just wanted, before we throw to the audience, I just wanted to ask to the panel, you don't all have to comment on this if you don't want to, but given that we all seem to agree about this, I wonder whether you feel that the sort of senior stakeholders, the CEOs, the policymakers, the mayors, and so on, that you're working with, how much is this something that they are aware of, think about, and I suppose, is there anything we could do to give them a bit more thought about it? But I don't know whether we want to just go down, Stephen.
I think the chat, from an employer point of view, all the things we've been talking about this afternoon, the challenge is getting it on that leadership agenda. Because the reality is, as most of you know in their own roles, you're dealing with the here and now, and actually some of the things we're talking about, unless you've got a particular hiring challenge now, trying to get this stuff to resonate is quite hard, because you've got to be willing and invest in something where there's no real facts about the future. So in my world, I think that's the challenge. Those either more far-sighted organisations or those that are in a sector that has got a particular hiring challenge, I think they're the ones that are thinking. I think that's the difficulty, is making it into a tangible here and now. Because I know what will happen in the world of employees, it'll be like 2022. Something will change, growth will come. We need to deal with this now. That's what will happen for a lot of people. So that, in my world, that's I think the biggest problem.
Right.
I think policymaker-wise, I've experienced a more growing awareness of the benefits of career advice and guidance in recent years. I think we've had consecutive discussion events with policymakers about it. I think there's some awareness there. I think the return on investment language and making that clearer, that was teased out at one of our events, that can help, especially with the growth narrative. I think that's a good hook. I think recent developments in terms of reshuffling, changing or overlapping responsibilities, and sort of broadest term of the ninth level catchphrase, joined up government, leave me hopeful, but I think there's a long way to go, especially where some of the careers advice and guidance is also strongly devolved. I think there's still a coherent national picture missing to tie all of that together.
So I'd say, from my perspective, the West Midlands Mayor has made a commitment around youth unemployment. They've made a commitment in relation to the distinct challenges we face and the interventions that need to be put into place. We've made commitments around 20,000 work pledges and around our Connect to Work to support people with health conditions to be an 18-24 focus. I think the challenge for the West Midlands is probably around the localism question. It's really around, we understand the interventions work, we understand the impact, but actually it's about the positioning of it. It's about when do we access an individual and enable them to have the right intervention at the right time within the heart of their community as well. And I think from a powers perspective, in terms of my authority, the only bit that we kind of have at this point is around being CEC, so in terms of the careers focus access, so resources for schools. And obviously from a skills perspective, where there's IAG that exists, but actually IAG exists right at the course starting, not at the end of the course. So it's around that connectivity of transition, but the real challenge is around us enabling that localism and where that's positioned to best work for our residents. Thank you.
Good question, Tristram. An easy one. There's something for me about, and I don't know how we get to this, but it's where we get to the career development, and I think we've all kind of touched on it, that career development is part of life, and it's not something that's a crisis point intervention, it needs to become a habit. We as a sector that we're talking about return on investment in all government, government about the effectiveness and efficiency of the public sector, and I think we as a sector can show that. There's some examples. We work in partnership with PwC, and some of the things our advisors do is when someone is DWP calls this a dropout or out of courses, for example, when the person said the creative mind was first and understood why and what they would get from it, the dropout and the flux sort of washing machine cycle, so they understood that the individual with clear guidance could understand what they could take up and where they're going to take them. It was seen at the recent CBI Leaders Summit, one of the speakers spoke about in a school, he previously a young person out of class and the teacher teaching about maths and blah blah. And he said, well, actually, that young person now understands why maths is important to their career, the career. And it was a young person who's kind of carrying on in maths, but now realised actually I hope to stick in at maths. So it's about that making connections to reality, which I think career development is, that it has to become habit, and it has to be long term, and it has to be always in lifelong.
I mean, that's a really nice example, and it kind of links to some of the things that Chris was just saying. We've got all of these mechanisms that it's not a mystery. It's not just that we happen to have found something in the data and like, well, why is it there? I think that's sometimes the challenge that's kind of put back to us is, well, couldn't this just be something else? Have you got, can you absolutely prove? Have you done a randomized control trial? But actually what we see is consistent patterns that when people get more career development activity, they do better in life in a whole range of areas, not just in terms of their jobs, but in terms of their, happiness and well-being and all of these sorts of things. And it's not mystery. Why? Because you can say, well, obviously, I mean, it's because people are seeing links between what they're doing at school and what they might do later. They're seeing, as Chris was saying, they're talking about these issues more, they're thinking about them more, it becomes a more salient issue within their social groups and so on. So I think there's a lot of reason why we should think of this. So what I'm going to push over to you as a group, and I'm going to make it kind of, this is probably not something that you would do if you're a school teacher, but I'm going to allow people to move around, potentially even roam outside of there, but I want people back in assembly by 3:35, I think, and we'll come back. So we'll give you about half an hour. And what I'd like to talk about essentially are three issues. First one is, have the panel got the salient issues right? Are these the issues which people are experiencing in their career, and which are also important to our country or our society? So have we got the sort of salient issues right? The second thing is, what else should we say about career development interventions? How can we make them work better? What sort of things should we have talked about perhaps more? And the third thing is, okay, what is the sort of influencing piece? What can we do either in terms of messaging this to make this more appealing to the actors like political parties and civil servants and so on, employers and so on, but also are there any actions and activities? What are the levers we've got to pull? Because I think for many of us, we've heard for years and years and years, Tony can probably say that he's heard this for 50 plus years, is people writing reports where they say, this area is really important. We think it really makes a difference. And yet it never seems to translate into really substantial shifts in the kind of funding envelope, or at least very rarely does. And certainly doesn't feel like that the current moment is one of those moments. So what are the issues people are experiencing in their career? Does career development really work? And if so, why? And then what can we do to try and convince the people who matter to think about that more? So you will get a glass of wine later. I mean, lots of discussion, lots of debate, lots of people talking about different things. So we'll try and structure it roughly around these three questions that we sort of pose to you. So let's. There we go. That's what I'm doing. So let's start with. So we had heard from the panel lots of issues that I think sort of two things. One is are affecting people's careers, and the other thing of which essentially matter at the sort of macro level to governments. And so I wonder whether we take any questions or comments or thoughts from your discussions on that kind of issue. Like, what are the big issues that you think matter, and have the panel got it right, or is there anything in the panel said that you wanted to kind of come back on? So what I suggest we do is we'll take 3 points and then we'll go to the panel and see if there's any comments. So yes, any thoughts? Yes.
Us wise people back here, we thought the panel had not paid a great deal of attention to career shift in mid and particularly later career, and particularly when you think about population pyramid. There may be lots of people in their 50s, many of them at stages of perhaps being ready to move around a bit, and with a likely working life of 15 or 20 years left. Really
Speaking as someone in my 50s who's in an industry that is almost certainly going to close down, I feel very sad. So, would anybody else like to come on that, or on any other of these sort of big issues? Yeah, let's take Laura.
I was slightly overwhelmed by the amount of challenges on the table earlier on. So then I was thinking, well, is there a way of standing back from those, having a much simpler approach? So potentially democratizing career conversations. So if we're trying to get to an exponentially higher number of exposure to career conversations, rather than thinking they have to happen as career interventions, is there a way we can create a movement for career conversations to happen, or in communities, as you were talking about in West Midlands, or in very natural ways between friends, for example, rather than think we have to control it? Is there a way of setting it?
Okay. Was it Rosemary? No, somebody over here was.
Yeah, it was relating to the First Lady's point about mid and later life careers. Just to drop names, but I have just written a chapter in a book, a handbook of holistic career coaching, which 5 authors. And what I've realised through my interviewing and research is that there's still an awful lot of discrimination against mid and later life workers, and that's really problematic given the demographic changes, and also that midlife and later life workers tend to buy into some of the biases, the stereotype that is around, and think, well, I can't do that because that's technology. Actually, they can. I mean, all the evidence shows that cognitively can manage to be slower and then maybe a bit worse. So I think there needs to be a relationship there. We need to focus on that group and support employers in employment.
Let's start with that older workers issue, because I think that is really critical. Does anybody in the panel like to come back on that? And you picked it up in your
So part of actually that the whole part of the reason I mentioned actually we used to record the AGR at the start, and what I didn't say is that actually a lot of the stuff we're talking about at the moment comes on this badge of emerging talent. And you can say all these lucky HR buzzwords, but it shows a shift. So Rolls-Royce, HSBC, that's what they call they're teams that used to be called graduate recruitment. And it's because everybody's trying to work out kind of the definitions of the boundaries of these functions. So what they are thinking about, and there's, I mean, again, we can spend the whole day kind of going when it gets to the operational elements of it, but it's how do you actually make training and development programs open to all age to reskilling as well as upskilling. If you're running a level 4 apprenticeship, how do you actually construct it so that somebody who's 21 can work alongside somebody who's 40? That's a lot easier said than done. My argument is employers are going to have to do it. Again, that growth bit is important because once the labour market gets tight, there's no choice. That's what will force it. So, as I said, for some organisations, it's kind of a thought process they're trying to grapple with. For some, it's more of a reality, but it's going to be forced. And the last thing I would say is one of the examples I use is Now Teach, the teaching programme for the over 50s. So Rob Fry, who runs it, used to be director of careers at Leicester. He used to run a graduate recruitment at Deloitte. So I said to him, just make the graduate recruitment programme for the over 50s. He went, yeah, there's differences, but basically that's the construct. So I'm absolutely, I think the jobs market is going to force the employers to have to switch on.
Anyone else want to come in on this? Yeah.
I'll maybe just respond to like the technology angle as well with a focus on AI. I know it's the fast forward that everything. I think it's a fair point that we didn't address that next to later in life career changes. But I think that will be one of the key things that we will have to focus on as we've just heard, and in particular in the context of AI. We've done some work on kind of skills will matter in an AI age, and how we help debunk myths and break down barriers, like trust towards technology, AI, and how to engage with it in a report that we published. This year? Yeah, this year. So I think I totally agree, and it's one of the ways forward. How do we do that? I think the question around locally, again, I think we're working with the Business Network around local digital skills partnerships and kind of like bringing local communities along, building capacity and capabilities in that way. And I think careers and career changes will form a big part of that. So
I think it does raise some issues for what is the nature of career development services, which have always tended to be pretty front loaded into the school system and education system at least. And I think where we're starting to go here is like, well, actually we need also to think about career development for older people who, I guess, some people would assume, well, they've already sorted that out, but in fact, you know, we're now in a position where many people might not have done. Yeah.
I think it's a really important point. I think 80% of our workforce for 2035 are already young. So actually, it's a really important point in relation to how we engage employers. Are we already those individuals who are, as I say, underemployed, or equal with those individuals who have foundation roles, and engaging them in a skills journey or a career journey that helps take you through, but equally it's around how we then take those individuals who've perhaps been in the industry for longer, or actually are finding their third or fourth career, and invigorating them to be able to do things slightly differently and align with how the economy and work is changing. I think it's really important in supporting our employers in terms of how they diversify, and part of that is taking that level of experience and amplifying it.
Do you recommend?
Yeah, I think for we're moving very much to community-based delivery, which is school, and how can adults access our services, their services. So we've just opened up looking online and looking in updated with adults, our PACE partnership, that's partnership action convention employment for the government situation. I think there's something. There's a balance that could be good for a role, because you worry about the scarring effects of being participation in school, and it's how we cross-sell careers into every customer group and product. What we found during the pandemic, and it's interesting, we were interviewing young people online be a team. Their mum and dad were queuing up to see the crucifying failed. We didn't find them, they were queuing up for it. So how do we get that again? We have to learn from find people for grass and community basis. You want that? I think there's something we're talking there about the need. We keep talking about an aging population. Is that it's a demographic, but is it always seems negative. You know, when you're still 20 years, 50 years, still in your role. And there's something about the language we use as well. Yeah, there's something that yeah.
You think we should talk more like we do with wine, you think? Yeah. Thank you. Oh, all right. So I'm going to hold Laura's question for a little bit longer because I just want to see, is there anything else that people want to say about any of these kind of big sort of issues in terms of what's changing in the environment and so on? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to think of the whole rise of best rights. And I think my view is, obviously we don't know the demographic of the people who are marching on the last weekend. But it's like, my sense is if people have good work, if people have decent work, they will be less likely to be driven into the hands of sort of blaming the other, but why they might not sort of have what they want in their life and things like that. So, I mean, I think that actually, career practice has got a role to try to support people to that, but I suppose in a way there's an urgency to this actually. That, we talk about socio-economic issues, but really I think the whole rise of that sort of very toxic movement, and it kind of adds to the urgency to how we support people into kind of meaningful and good work. It doesn't have to be meaningful, it's good work.
Great.
David and John, we were discussing how do you get past political shorthand? Politicians are just interested in the immediate or the next 4 years. How do we get past that?
All right, I might hold that one a little bit for a sec. No, not because it's not a good question, because it is a very good question, but I sort of trying to come to that a bit later. But yeah, what else? Let's take one more, David. Yeah.
Just to say a bit more about the age at which we write these conventions, because you're absolutely right. I mean, in England, it's very much schools and adults, young people and adults, people talk in those terms. Largely young people, and actually by young people, 11 to 18, or sometimes even more. So now I think it's 11 to 16. And adults, no, it's not all adults, it's long-term unemployment. And so when people use this very simplistic phrase, an all-age service, I think we need some research that says, at what point would the intervention be most impactful? My own anecdotal experiences, alongside the case that Lynn made, I think we also need a service for young adults. My own children and children of friends, the real time they needed some help was in their early 20s. They finished their university course and didn't know where they were. Or not at university and still needed help. There was a focus, I can make a real case for interventions, only on anecdotal evidence. I mean, I think we need some proper research to say, in contemporary times, when would the right timing be? I think we're still thinking very old school. It's school.
Right. Well, I'll take one from Jill, and then I'll try and feed some of these things in. Yeah.
Well, I just want to follow up what David said, but last week, Tristram and I were both at the NICEC Academy in Malta, and we were hearing from some European scholars about the study of emerging adulthood, and that phase which lasts until 30, and how they, we talked once, didn't we, about prolonged transitions to uncertain futures, but that period of establishing presence in the workplace has become more attractive.
Okay. Let's start with this big issue around the kind of, there's a feeling that there's something not working right in our society, and there are a lot of people who are looking for some kind of solution that's outside of the mainstream. Most of them are going to the right. Do people in the panel buy this sense that it's because one of the reasons that's happening is people haven't got good jobs, they haven't been able to establish kind of good lives, the things that perhaps previous generations might have expected. Is that, I mean, it seems a lot for career development to take that on its own, but is it part of the solution to that?
I mean, I know also hard evidence here, but I do believe that sort of good job and deriving value and self-worth is good for mental health, and therefore I do think there's a contributing factor here that by lifting people into good jobs could be a mitigating factor.
I think on the you joked about Keir Starmer, so we're thinking growth, and a lot of it does boil down to that, you know, because I think we can talk about actually what gives people better information to get, but if those jobs aren't there, I mean, the graduate market, and the broader graduate market in terms of training programs is generally all right at the moment, bit of ups, bit of downs, but I think the broad labour market, there was a real shortage of jobs. People are making, you know, those have got, you know people, family, friends, daughters, nieces, etc., you know, nephews. It's a tough jobs market out there, and I think there's something to break. I don't have the answer to this, but a bit more thought to it. At that young person in that very generic labour market, I think you know, that as you go through university, we're very pro higher education, but there's real challenges. I'm not surprised of evidence that people get to 21, 22 back to university, and they assume that university is a direct connection to a job. It's not. You know, it's I like to say that's what it is. So and that's beyond the route. That is back. You know, the NI tax increases did higher. That's been brought up. That's not that's true. So there is some of this that's outside of and I think the last thing I would say on this, reflecting again on the conversation so far, is this push and pull. Yeah, I think one of the difficulties of young people at school is I've given up talking to school kids because I get blank faces. But it struck me as actually they'll pull information towards when it's important. Actually trying to get them to, I mean, what questions was this, what fun time was this, really struck me recently. But they're not going to listen to going easy. So we've got to give them experiences to make them go, oh, right, if I do that, then. So yeah, that's my main thought. But growth, I hate to say, because it's such a media buzzword, it's the root of a lot of things.
So what about if we shift into thinking about the way we might deliver services? I mean, Laura's made a sort of proposition that, well, maybe we're thinking about this wrong in terms of just pushing money into service delivery. Maybe there might be sort of a culture change, engaging more people in this, trying to get people to have more conversations with their family and so on. So that's one thought. And then we've also got thoughts about, well, don't we also need services for groups who are not currently getting some? We talked about older workers a little bit, but actually David says, well, what about younger workers as well? Is the way we're delivering services at the moment, is that right? Have we got any ideas that we might want to think about in terms of, well, what do we think of those two ideas or those three ideas? Yeah.
We do think differently. We can think about our open people system and schools and people at the back who've been involved very much in the conversation. We struggle sometimes with mentioning it, career, and I think the challenge is well. And I think that we've got people who feel that they're passive recipients of things rather than participants in society, and it's agency feel that. But I think it is, we were speaking earlier about how do we teach other people to become part of the system, part of the influence and importance of them. There's a lot that's out there now, the fake news. So how do we get people from fake news to understand 6 steps towards it, and the journey to go on in the networks that we have. I think networks, particularly people are choosing different networks now, which we see, and how do we get
Claudia, I wonder whether I come to you, because you said something very interesting that you went past fairly quickly, which was about engaging young people in the design and thinking about what service it, which kind of echoed some of what Sandra's just said. I wonder whether could you say a bit more about what you've got in mind there?
I mean, it's based on our sort of emerging evidence, speaking to young people. So I wouldn't go back to what was said, but it's kind of like the idea that the way we speak to basically what you just described, the way we engage young people and like how they receive information, how they are being told about what the options are, has to be more reflective of how they experience the world and their experience. So yeah, that's sort of the fundamental idea behind it.
Yeah.
So I think the key thing for me around this is around sources of trust and where our residents, individuals go out and seek their advice. And it's around how we empower those organisations, community organisations, to be elevated. And I don't mean that in terms away from an organisation and they see themselves as a signposting one, when actually they are perfectly positioned if they're supported to help understand what the rest of the ecosystem looks like, to be engaged and kind of mapped into that to provide a more prominent role, wider role within enhanced confidence, to be able to support our residents to be able to navigate their way. It's no coincidence for me in relation to looking at the charts that were presented earlier on the screen and looking around which career intervention then produced the takeoff point. For me, that's trust. For me, that's actually my first careers intervention might feel very transactional, depending on what that looks like. I might feel like a box being ticked. My second one might be I've got a little bit more confidence in relation to this. My fifth one is like, gosh, I'm really interested in what I've got to say. Some of that trust that exists in our communities exists at a very early stage. How that relationship's developed, but I think that's really important in terms of how we take other organisations that can support our residents on their journey.
I mean, this, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
And again, it's how policy is met with development. We have a what comes up as Hooley safe strategy and it's living in young girls. And one of the things was about living in young girls escaping from commercial section exploitation. And what we've done is rather than us like you can jump in and just like an option in life here. What we're doing is we're working with the charities, we're working with building that trust and people that are working with us now so that they can trust. One of the things the female practitioner is the first thing, build trust, so it's the understanding of trust and to bring someone back in to development.
It sounds like there's a lot of interest in like spreading these competencies out into other professionals, but then beyond as well into What other thoughts of people?
Very briefly, just on the employer practice bit. That skills-based organisation stuff is interesting because I think when I see employers doing things differently, it's not under the badge of career. It is a badge of skill. So it is, for example, a Unilever saying, right, one day a week you go and work on a project of different sizes. That's increasing skill level, but it's changing perceptions of the work you can do. So you guys will all know the theories that underpin it, I don't. So I think there's something about raising awareness that that's career, so you need to talk more about it. But there's something in there around the experiences generating a different thought process leading to different outcomes. And that's what we're really interested in at all ages, because it's just you build that into cultural system change.
Sean?
Well, I'd like to thank the panel. It's really interesting thoughts. I've got loads of questions, but I will just choose one. I'm really interested in what John's talking about and about the localisation. And I'm just looking at what the government's talking about, even further developments around health and whatever else it was I'm talking about. I suppose one of my concerns is about postcode lotteries and that, what you're talking about, it feels like the ideal. Careers is about localism. It's about
career professionals knowing the local environment, they know who's recruiting, they've got good relationships with the community, with employers, a lot of which I think has been lost over the last couple of decades. So I suppose there's two parts. One is, how do we stop postcode lottery? And you know, if I grow up in the West Midlands, I'm going to have a brilliant careers experience. If I grow up in somewhere else, maybe not. And then the second bit around that is, what can we get government to do to help us, you know, build a much stronger infrastructure? Because I see a lot of what we talk about all in isolation. It's the same people saying the same things, but actually nothing's shifting, you know. And I think local authority, the combined authority, is the place that will shift if it's going to. So what we're going to do and how do we stop postcode lottery?
Cool. Andrew.
Unison has a concern about agency workers and the whole. I think one thing we neglect in the careers world is employers using agencies so much. And to go back to the right wing element, we have a big worry that those kind of workers are turning to the right because of institutional not having access to a career or a proper job. And I think in the careers world, we just don't get a grip of the whole labour market and the impact of employment agencies. And it's what we do about that.
Any other points? Yeah, Wendy, yeah.
I think it was so interesting listening to who should provide what and when. I think the two key points are sort of just below the surface in what Sandra was saying. One is, when people want help, they want it then, they don't want it when you want to give it. And so whatever we do has to be kind of on demand, as I often say to employers, not in April, when you kind of say these things should happen in April. It's kind of September when I'm thinking about my career, you know. So I think that bit, and time was mentioned earlier, and I think it's so important. And the second one is, I think career support is something that human beings give other human beings. And I appreciate the whole profession that this is saying, but to try and say that people who aren't qualified career guidance professionals can't do it, locks us into a model where we will never afford to give it to lots of people. So I think from a qualified career guidance professional is to enable other people conversations to help others who are trusted. Trust point came up too. It's easier to go to a trusted person who's been given a bit of help to have a better conversation with you than to go to a careers advisor who you don't trust with their head.
Okay, so we've got a lot of issues there. The sort of issues that Siobhan has raised around the kind of postcode lotteries. It's great that everything's more localized, but does that mean that some people don't get it? This issue about the kind of on-demand nature of services, and then I think an important group of basically people in non-standard employment. I mean, it's precarious workers, but it's possibly also self-employed people and so on. How do we? So I don't know which ones you want to come in on, but it feels like the postcode lottery one should probably go to you. So do you want to start with that? Yeah.
Oh, it's a challenge. You know, I suppose for me, it's in relation to, there's a lot of test and learn, and there's got some really not a careers example, but perhaps for me it's more an example of I'm currently commissioned around digital exclusion, and it was working with voluntary sector organisations to identify people who would be excluded, engage with them, and then support their connection actually with wider delivery of some of adult community learning, work, and all of those sorts of opportunities. And as part of that model as a combined authority, we took them to make sure that across 7 local authorities that were engaged with at least 2 to 3 community organisations in each of those local authority areas. So from my perspective in terms of the postcode lottery, combined authority exists because of our 7 constituent local authorities. So for me, there is a real onus on making sure that each of those local authorities has an opportunity to engage with that service, for it to be tested and utilised. The challenge for me will always be around amplification, because you can have the best model in the world, but ultimately the challenge for me is around how do I amplify, how do I sustain it, over a course of a period. I think one of the real issues when we're having trust within our communities is around with being so stop and start in relation to the opportunities that exist. But there is that thing in terms of, well, when's the next thing going to land? So it's almost this slow and sure build-up of interventions, but making sure that where we can, we pilot them and test them in all areas so that we can see how they benefit different communities. The difficulty we've got, unless somebody unlocks the same way that we might have £150 million worth of skills funding, including £150 million of employment support and careers funding, it's very difficult for them to create a funded ecosystem that ensures that universal level of support. But ultimately, that's why we're so reliant on the goodwill and spirit of our community organisations, of our partner organisations, to build that ecosystem in partnership as opposed to it being necessarily.
Good. Sandra, do you worry about leaving all the poor English people out in the cold without access to career development services?
I think we are very much looking at basically now and community delivery. So we're kind of moving away from our peer things in high street and Scotland, getting into hubs and either partners coming in with us or us in the hub. It's that thing we try to give a consistent service for Scotland, but there's a flexibility in the regional setup. So the consistency is what we offer, but maybe how we offer it changes depending on, even from the individual school. We're trying to push power to our individual practitioner. For example, at any school in a say, you know the partners, you know the customers, you know their needs, and that is different from Fife, different from Aberdeen, Aberdeen's different from Sandra. And it's actually really thinking what is the needs and how do we ensure that those who want it and that can access it. And I think the accessibility is the visibility. How do that? Where is the door? And I think that's the point of the partnership. It's not just signposting, it's bringing people into the conversation. That's the way to have it. Everybody's talking about it, everybody's helping you. That's how we'll get it. Yeah.
Keith, do you want to come in on this point?
Well, it's related, yes, indeed. I mean, because we have someone here from Scotland, which is like what we were talking about in the break, which is there's so much knowledge across the UK, and for some reason in England we have this, we're not going to treat everybody else kind of mindset, and really learning from what's happening in Wales, particularly around career development support and career policy. And I think we do need to find a way in which we really truly open up our own mindset and ways of thinking to learn from others and then act and speak. So my question in a way is related to what's been said in the room, but also from the panel as well, is how do we really get urgency in decision making and action to really affect the change that is needed? It's all very well talking about funding cycles and all that kind of stuff, which is a very narrow way of thinking about this. If we don't make things happen quick and learn quickly and transform quickly, then we just will be stuck in these same conversations like we had 30 years ago, if we are here today, at the time. So my question is around speed of decision and truly finding ways to share experiences from Scotland that we can truly learn from and implement in ways, for example, across this localism issue, for example. How do we really accelerate change?
I'll throw in Andrew's point from earlier on, which I think is very related to this, which is, okay, you want it to be quicker, but he wants it to be slower in the sense of more consistent over time. So we want policy cycles that are not just focused on short-termism, but develop systems over periods, which I feel you do get in other countries much more so than you do in England. I just wondered, I don't know whether anyone, or maybe Claudia, whether you'd like to have a go. I know but like what's the right balance, I suppose, and because I think our history of career development services has been like a history of experimentation and like rapidly, funding flowing quite quickly and then disappearing and structures changing and so on. I don't know whether you've got any thoughts about how we can kind of, well, engage with those sorts of issues?
I wish it was different about the policy. As my original background is sustainability policy, and it's very much the same thing. It's kind of like stop starts reinventing the wheel in certain issues, and never really. We still talk about the same thing 10 years on, with similar funding mechanisms that have been tested and failed before, etc. So it does feel quite frustrating. I think my overall mantra in terms of like the consistency and longevity of something like that is still cross-party working, but that is getting increasingly more difficult as we're getting more fragmented as well, and the unions getting extreme. I think we were encouraged at the start. This Parliament, the government, certain things were kept in place. I'm just going to LSIPs, for example, that was sort of good mechanism, good contribute. Just to connect that with the previous question as well, we were thinking about as part of our ongoing research at the moment, embedding some careers KPIs into local skills plans, local partnerships, etc. But it is hard to find the balance between things take a long time and need to be thought through so that you don't have the unintended consequences of yet another policy intervention that just has a stop-start or boom-bust kind of like phenomenon versus the urgency, which I recognize you need to create that to some extent. I think we're focusing on the need part at the moment because it's such a staggering figure, and hoping that that language around that will create some of that urgency. But I think, as horrible as that sounds, we need to find more with like horrific things to really drive home the urgency situation at the end, because I think that's quite sunken with everyone.
I mean, I've been involved as a participant in some of these processes as well as an observer of them, and one of the things that I think government always seems to underestimate the complexity of setting up a new institution, which is just because, you know, you set up a new, I mean, we were talking about frustrations with Skills England, and you think, well, they've been around for a long while, but you know that the day that Skills England was established, somebody was like, where are we going to have our office, and how do we buy chairs, and you know, and it takes a long while before anything happens. And I think it does seem to be very frustrating that we can't work with existing systems and evolve them a bit more. I don't know whether anyone's got any more to say on that, but Stephen, I wonder whether you wanted to pick up this point about non-standard employment. That seems quite important as an area for career development, that I know many of your members are the best employers and not using that sort of thing, but I just wonder whether you had a kind of perspective on that.
It's not really the world that that kind of the IC operates in. What's interesting actually is it's not happening yet. There's quite a few conversations around AI. It's probably slightly different than what we're thinking about, and actually one or two people can't make say people have more fixed term contracts, because actually AI is going to totally change the shape of jobs to flexibility with the work. That's kind of, but the whole agency piece, that's not really the world that we operate in. But I think again that employers are trying to look at cost base at the moment. That's one of the things they're going to turn to after the market reality.
What about, has anybody got anything to say? Wendy's point is well made, but it's not always that easy to design a service around that. Has anyone got any thoughts about how do we make services sort of on demand, what people need, when they need it? Given some of the points that we've already made today, which is like, well, there are quite big gaps in entitlement to actually access services across the life course. How can we make it so people can be more, get the services they need when they need?
Definitely take some from online data film to be able to direct do services within services. I think
having different types of service on offer.
Right, we're gonna write this session up in some form and share it. So this is kind of going to be your last chance to kind of make the points that you feel must be made in this discussion on kind of skills, policy, careers, and so on. So yeah, let's take a few more points, and then we'll perhaps go once more down the panel and get final thoughts from you. Yeah, so yeah.
One thought we had, we brought a number of young people together, and they haven't talked about careers. They've come up with another idea, which is the idea of our social signature. And everybody in the room has a social signature, and our social signature is the mark we leave on others, our community, ourselves, and the world around us. It's the mark we leave for good. And nobody's too young to have a social signature, nobody's too old. And we've developed a resource which I'd love to share with you, but I'd love the panel's views on how do we create an ecosystem to help every child leave primary school having done one of these 24 things to make the world a better place. And also, how do we help people, if they can't even write their name, their signature, think about their own little cross. And their cross has 4 points. The power of me, understanding who I am, power of we, relating to others, the power of them, caring for my community, the power of us, of being part of something bigger than just by myself. So we're doing that within the Liverpool City region. I've just found £40 million to create first social signature school for kids that are special needs. Because if we can build a village, a social signature village for those children, the furthest away from the pod, we can do it for anybody. But I'd love anybody in terms of solution to work together to create this social signature ecosystem, from the research, from the policy. I love employers to ask that question of young people. You may not be good at English or maths, but it's not the marks you get in life, it's the marks you leave.
So we've got that sort of idea of like, are we thinking about career development wrong? Is it not just, are we thinking about it into an individualistic way? Is it about making a contribution to society, the people around you, and so on? That's good. Well, what else have we got? Any other points that people would like to make at this stage? Jill, yes.
I'm very intrigued by agency work and what are the levers that would encourage, require agencies to engage with this, with the people that they're hiring. Yeah, and you know, just I completely take your point, Stephen, that it's not your world, but whose world is it? And you know, how do we reach those people? But in terms of the Laura and Wendy and those professional issues, I think that is a really tricky issue for us. But the way I like to frame that is thinking about learning, and individuals are learning about career from the people around them, and they might be learning helpful things and they might be learning unhelpful things. But if you work with the individual to help them to think about who are all the messages, who are the, you know, what are the messages I'm receiving, and how are they influencing me, and how can I get to the ones that will be most helpful? That's the role of the career development professional.
So I think the social signature stands up. What big ways to think about who we are and what we do in different places make. But the people that we need to influence to create the infrastructure to be able to have that impact probably don't speak that language. And what we were talking about was code switching, which comes from the ICEC. They are, and I wonder whether it's a profession without cultural appropriation, I don't want to go down that route, but whether we need to think about how we code switch a little bit, actually, in terms of what we believe in and what we do and the difference it can make, and the people that can create the infrastructure for that to happen, because they are necessarily more short term, they are thinking bottom line efficiency, risks, those sorts of things that don't naturally infuse our language. I think in terms of getting the message across, if we can find a way of having some comfort with how we can talk about what we believe in and the impact we want to have in a language that people who will create infrastructure understand, we may be able to have that collective impact. I was saying here, if some of my colleagues heard how I talk to my vice chancellor about careers, they'd be a bit, "Ugh," but I have to speak to them in a way that means that they can go, actually, yeah, no, you're right, this is important, this is the risk, here's what you need. And that is absolutely not how I would work with my colleagues that we're going to deliver. So I just wonder if we need to consciously think about that, so we don't lose the brilliant transformative aspect of what we do, but we have really structured and spirit.
Yeah, David, yeah.
Just to, again, follow on the points about encouraging more people to basically think, there can be a nervousness about letting go. So actually, non-professional people have these conversations. But if you think about it generating additional demand for professional career-based services, that could be powerful. So our research last year showed that more like 80% of people want to improve their careers, only 15% engaged. And mostly it's particularly the bottom 20% who could most benefit from it, have career confidence, job security of pay, don't feel it's relevant to them, they're not aware of it, and so on. So something like finding ways to encourage more of the population to have conversations amongst themselves and with others, but with better guided questions, could help more people be more aware of the value of career management. And that in turn leads more people going, but actually, I now need to go further, and therefore I would want to engage with a professional, which is what then puts the pressure on government to say, well, actually, you should invest in it. At the moment, there's no burning platform. You know, there are some criticisms, but there are other things that you know, when school roofs are falling down, saying we need more career providers is always a tough ask. So I think building up that public demand is important, but it links back to the other point I thought earlier, because you're asking about, you know, do government get it? And also I think to Chris's point about, is there more value we get? A lot of the discussion tends to be about the intervention, as in have people had a career guidance meeting, they've done work experience, etc. And that's really the base level. The world of work is dynamic, where jobs are going to be changing, new people leaving, able to keep learning through life and understanding what should, and with career management skills, they can react and anticipate. And we're not doing that at the moment. So I think those two things almost tie together. If we can have people having more conversation, we can start raising the ante that this is just base level intervention, very powerful. But I think Chris's point about there's another level of benefit is that you've got young people leaving, you've got people who have interventions in adulthood going, how do you manage your career through life? How do you anticipate? How do you deal with the problem? That would be the big challenge that sees a big run.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the exciting things. I mean, it's exciting about what Chris is saying, but in the conversations we're having here, is there's a strong sense of like, this is stuff that works. There's loads of ways to make it work better. It'd be better if it was more embedded into the community and so on, but also there are huge holes in what we call a system at the moment. Loads of people who can't get anything to help them who could really do with it. And that requires us to think much more ambitiously about what is the nature of our ask from government, essentially, in all of its forms, because it's not just, well, could we have 10% more in schools? It's actually, look, well, we need to really think about this as a big system and to improve it as a system. So let's just take final words from, so reflections, thoughts, but also if you happen to be sitting on a perfect, you know, answer to how we engage politicians, then please, now is the time to share it with the group. So yeah, if we start down that end, and yeah, any thoughts you have on what's been said so far and to wrap up today?
It's been brilliant and it's blown my head in a lot of ways. For me, making decisions and having choice actually does take skill. We don't fall over and end up where we end up. I think career is now, this distant thing, and I start talking about now. You're in it, no matter what age and stage you're at, you're in it. And David's point, I think if we start talking to our government policies in the same way as they're actually career development, it was about career management skills, it was about skills that continue to go forward and what we want to potential contribute to society and be in society. That will make the society in the future hopefully positive and not over time. I think we need to start talking about career development
development with our practitioners, we actually develop skills for people. We don't just get them guidance.
Great, thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for enabling me to speak. I suppose for me, this is about ambition. This is about our ambition for our residents as well. I think it's really important that we enable our residents to make the right decisions at the right time in their careers. I think that's really important. And I suppose the bit that really resonates, especially around our own communities, it's around accessibility. It's about those individuals. I always sound like I'm summarising like Cheers theme. Let's talk about this, but then having a place where someone can go where they know their name, but they have that level of trust that enables them then to kind of make those decisions in the empowered way, not just because that's the only information I've got. And it's huge value that you're providing through to support everything with those transitions. Thank you.
I'll keep it fairly short. I think summarize the and it's something that I think David, we spoke about how careers is a connective tissue between all of these things. I think our ambition at Policy Connect has moved from like, let's have all of these like special conversations about careers and make sure that all of the conversations that we have around skills and growth incorporate careers rather than it being kind of like the add-on that we talk about. So putting that at the heart is our mission.
I guess the last thought that's bubbling in my mind, apart from the Cheers earworm, is it is about language and what David said about long-term thinking, the language. If I think about employers, CEOs will invest in a program with agency workers that gives them better training. If they get better retention, somebody goes, you do that, your bottom line does this. Now, I know this is very reductive, but if you can get that language into play, it moves from this being, well, careers would be a nice thing to do, but actually I've got this thing on fire every day, I've got to deal with that. Actually, you can get the language that they will help put that fire out. I think that's where you get that long-term investment and support. And I think it's there. I think one of the things a couple of you heard this, but that textbook you got me to read. That's what understanding careers. It blew my mind to a certain extent. So actually, a lot of the theoretical underpinning of what you do. This isn't my world so much. I thought most employers, HR directors, tell us know nothing of this stuff. Whereas if they did, they go, "Oh, I could manage my workforce a lot better if I knew that stuff." So yeah, productivity and getting some of those ideas and knowledge into that space, I think could have good returns for you all.
Right. Well, thank you, everybody. Well, actually, let's start with a round of applause for the panel. I think the thing that there's lots of really positive messages here. There's lots of stuff that tells us this stuff is working, it's valuable. Even some sense that it might be moving forward in terms of understanding from policymakers, even if at the moment the money isn't flowing. I think the thing I take from it is we've got to point out to policymakers what's on fire, as everybody seems to be talking about that. But the problem is at the moment it feels like everything's on fire, doesn't it? So it's not so easy. But I think the point here about, we've got high NEET levels, we've got skills shortages, we've got struggles with hiring, we've got all sorts of issues around mid-career switching, all of these issues are really salient policy issues. And I think if we can carry on trying to articulate these and explaining why career development work is not the whole of the solution to it, but a very important part of it, then hopefully we'll get somewhere. Jill, can I hand back over to you to take us into the next stage?
Thank you. Well, I'm very struck by the idea of career development work as connective tissue. As a middle-aged woman, the internet is trying to convince me that what I need in my life is collagen. And you don't need to comment on that, but I'm going to, careers is collagen. Yeah, that's what I'm taking away today. Thank you, Tristram, for very ably chairing that and bringing all those threads together and back to the yarn metaphors. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And thanks to Nikki, who's been taking notes. You definitely deserve a drink. We've got a recording. We're not completely sure what quality it's going to be. So what we do with it will depend on that. But we'll certainly, we hope, be able to use it to generate some sort of an output.